is resolved as well. I heard that someone did not have a partner in this room. I hope that issue is resolved. So, all right. So without any further ado, I'd like to invite upon the floor the Prime Minister. Here.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right. I shall begin now. Ladies and gentlemen, we tell you that today's debate is about one and only one thing. It's essentially about how virtue signaling affects an issue. This could be a very controversial issue. For example, the George Floyd issue, or maybe like the Yemen starvation crisis issue. Essentially, what we need to prove to you to win is that virtue signaling is above all unethical and inherently harmful in the long run as a means of garnering support or spreading awareness towards a certain issue. So, with that being said, what's the one thing that we want to achieve today? For whatever context, we essentially want to achieve spreading awareness and incentivizing change via social media. And we're going to talk about how virtue signaling does not do this very well, and in the long run, eventually fails to do this and makes it inherently harmful, right? What's the burden we need to defend? I see coming out of opposition that virtue signaling indirectly spreads awareness, and I see them talking about how virtue signaling could be linking like throwing in links on how to support a certain issue, etc., etc. And I'm going to talk about how this is not true, right? So, with that being said, what's the alternative that we bring to the table today? The alternative we bring is posts of support with links and actual like ways to help a certain issue. This could look like linking down a page where you can go and support like the Black Lives Movement after you see like a picture of George Floyd being killed, etc., etc., right? But before that, I think one thing that really needs to be cleared up in today's debate and needs to be seen clearly on both sides is what essentially is virtual signaling. Virtual signaling essentially means posting a political view or a view on a controversial issue, right? This could be to gain acknowledgement or praise. It looks like something like a rant or like the infamous black square, where so many individuals were just posting a black square to show their political view in support of the Black Lives Movement, right? Ladies and gentlemen, we tell you that based on this, we can infer one thing. Virtue signaling essentially means posting to gain acknowledgement and posting to gain praise. I think the info slide makes it very clear, and I'll go on to talk about why this is actually inherently harmful. But before that, let's get a slightly closer view as to what virtue signaling actually looks like, right? I'll give you the example of the George Floyd scenario, where individuals began to post black squares on their Instagram feeds to show their support for the Black Lives Movement. Individuals began to rant on their political view on how much they hated these cops who murdered this guy, and how much they hated these individuals to their guts. But we tell you the problem that essentially comes from this is misinformation. When something like this becomes so popular and everyone wants to jump on that wave of fame, everyone wants to jump on that wave because the hashtag could be trending, or like Black Lives Movement is trending, we tell you that individuals in status quo, unfortunately, are very likely to actually post, just shows of support or make rants that inherently cause misinformation. Something Jessica will go on to talk about, and Jessica will tell you why it's so inherently harmful, right? But before all that, ladies and gentlemen, let's look at the psychological impact that virtue signaling has, right? People see it, people feel bad, people forget about it. Why is that, ladies and gentlemen? That's because most of the time, unfortunately in status quo, virtue signaling looks like essentially throwing out your political view to gain acknowledgement and praise. And because of this, a lot of individuals have overshadowed the true thing that needs to be done. That could be linking, like a link to support a movement. That could be, showing a number that you call, a group you could join to actually support this movement. Individuals essentially want to throw out their political views so they seem more intellectual on their Instagram feed, or so they can ride that fame bus and get more likes. We tell you that the moment this happens, and this narrative that virtue signaling has proved has become inherently harmful in actually garnering support and spreading awareness, because individuals are so damn focused on actually riding that fame bus and just throwing out their political views that a lot of the time these individuals forget that they're not actually helping. Because at the end of the day, you can post 1,000 like black squares on your Instagram feed, but that's not going to change a thing, because most of the time individuals aren't linking ways to actually help these movements. Individuals aren't telling you ways to actually help these movements, right? A lot of these individuals are misinformed, very quickly jumping on this fame bus, right? And we tell you that's inherently harmful because it's ineffective and it doesn't achieve the goal of actually spreading awareness and incentivizing change. So let me move on to our alternative argument and what it looks like. Our alternative argument essentially means a post of support. What is that? This means that these individuals could post like I know, like, an Instagram post or a Snapchat post of what happened. And these individuals in our world are expected, a society where individuals who post these kind of things are expected to know a clear picture and the full story of what has happened. And these individuals are expected to link ways to take action to a certain issue. This could mean a link to support like funding for that page. This could mean like, a number to call, etc., ladies and gentlemen. With that being said, let me explain to you why this is so much more effective. Because in our world, we shun a society that jumps on this fame bus and just posts like a Black Lives Matter square to show their support. We want a world where informed individuals are actually able to post what they understand of the issue, able to post links and ways as to how they can take action towards this issue. We tell you that in our world, you may have less posts, but you will have better posts where individuals are more likely to take action. We tell you that that's a world that inherently solves the goal in today's debate. Secondly, let me talk about the ethical dilemma that exists in today's debate, right? Ladies and gentlemen, virtue signaling is inherently unethical. Why is that? That's because most individuals who are actually posting about virtue signaling want to, like, post to seem intellectual, want to post to gain acknowledgement, to gain praise. The motion clearly states it, right? What does that mean? That means that these individuals are riding the wave of controversy. We tell you it's extremely unethical and wrong. That means government or opposition has to tell you why they are okay with a world where 90% of individuals who actually post may not fully know what's going on, or may not like throw in a link to calls to action, etc., and are essentially just riding the fame bus of a guy who was brutally murdered or children starving in Yemen. We tell you that that's a world they need to defend, and tell you why the world that they're defending there is actually beneficial, and that world actually spreads awareness better than us. Lastly, let me talk about the culture that virtue signaling creates, right? It creates this posting political view means you help. That's the narrative it pushes, and I tell you it's inherently harmful. Because essentially what it says is, if you post a black square, you help. Like, no, that's not what it means. Posting a black square and saying nothing and just saying, like putting like crying face emoji, which is what a lot of people are doing, and the culture that has been pushed so far, we tell you that's inherently harmful because you're not really creating change. You're riding a fame bus. Even if you garner support, it's marginal at best because you aren't giving and aren't telling individuals who may not care, or individuals who are just looking at your feed, why they need to take action, why they need to take action now. That's why our alternative performs much better under status quo, and our alternative automatically takes today's debate. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, government needs to defend a world where they're okay with this unethical practice, and they need to prove to us how their side actually garners support better than us. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, never been prouder to propose. Thank you.
I would like to thank that speaker for that speech. I will be timing you on the text channel of this group chat, but I would also request the speakers to time themselves as well. Yeah, without any further ado, inviting the leader of opposition. Here.
Yeah, hi, just give me 10 seconds.
Sure.
All right. So panel, notice how the Prime Minister has essentially underplayed the kind of value and the kind of support that this form of virtue signaling can garner to their social movement. I'll move into the rebuttals to their specific points, which will be integrated throughout my speech. But firstly, let me start off with some basic characterization that the Prime Minister missed out on. That is to say, what issues are the kind of issues that are being propagated? What do these political stances look like that are being spread by people who are after virtue signaling on social media spheres and other spheres, which include like social engagement to a great extent? These issues are issues that are largely held beliefs against unjust systems or corrupt governments, policies that harm more than they do good, and issues that have some sort of a basis in status quo present already, but still require a lot of support. As a result of which, at this point, it becomes very clear that spreading of a controversial message or a controversial stance on social media will lead to more criticism than social acknowledgement. And for people seeking this sort of virtue signaling, it's like firstly, like principally incorrect for them to go ahead and pursue virtue signaling in the first place, and secondly, they won't do it they won't inherently do it because it won't suffice to their needs and what they want to do. Hence these issues are issues that look like the Prime Minister spoke correctly about the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States of America, or the situation in Yemen, the famine and the drought. Now let me talk about why social media serves as an integral part of spreading the message, and why virtue signaling in this regard is so important. The Prime Minister comes up and talks about how unethical it is, and how it would be much better if people, instead of just sharing black squares on Instagram, also spread links to petitions or links to donation organizations. Firstly, we do not understand why sharing links to donation organization or petition links cannot be involved in the political stance of a person, or the social standpoint of a person, or anything that the person shares on social media as a means to gain validation. Because it has been widely seen on social media that even sharing petition links and links for organizations that are donation funds and support these movements at large also help people garner a lot of social acknowledgement and social validation, as a result of which it can be considered something that is an integral part of them sharing their political view or their political stance as a whole. This leads to further on in this speech I will talk about two things: why the kind of spread that virtue signaling brings to movements and to spreading of social messages and creating awareness in social spheres is far superseding and far more important than even debating the ethics of this entire thing. But I will also tell you why this is not unethical. Secondly, I will talk to you about how it translates into actual change in society. And thirdly, I'm going to talk about how this provides a recourse mechanism for a lot of people who are otherwise blocked out of society to find some sort of validation through social spheres and reassociate and revalidate themselves and their own beliefs and the standpoints that they believe so firmly in. Firstly, let me talk about this certain passive imbibation of values. Let's say a person who wants to gain this sort of social media validation and social media gratification goes on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter and starts retweeting or reposting posts that already have gained some sort of traction, or are propagating some social message that is largely important in the current sphere, as a result of which his identity gets somewhat linked to the message in and of itself at that point in time. That is, his followers and his friends know that he believes in that matter, that he is sharing it for a reason, not just because of gaining validation, but also to spread the message in a positive manner as well. Now, what happens in the due process is that even his followers come across this post and even they retweet it. And the more and more this post gets shared, the more and more awareness is created. At this point, it becomes important for me to tell you the inherent value of awareness that side government doesn't want to engage with. They come up and tell you that not all sorts of awareness is good. Even if people get to know about the social movement, it doesn't really help if they are not somehow contributing to the change. Well, in the status quo that we live in, it's a very selfish world, and not a lot of people actually want to sign petitions or actually want to donate to organizations. Now, at this point, we have to question the inherent biases that exist in the hearts and minds of people against certain social and political issues. The point at which we strongly believe in social and political issues and we start spreading these messages, and people start seeing these messages largely on social spheres such as Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. They see constant retweets and constant posts by their close friends or by acquaintances. They start this after for first, it's important for us to know that not all forms of virtue signaling is posting black squares on social media. It also includes posting elaborate, well-read messages about what your political stance is and what you want to believe in. Side government cannot tell you that if you want to be an intellectual and you're just posting a black square in the first at the same time, if you want to look like an intellectual in the first place, you need to post things that are relevant, largely relevant. Yeah, I'll take you later. Are largely relevant and are largely understandable and make sense. So the point at which the messages that you spread are making sense, people are forced to question their inhibitions, as a result of which a certain amount of awareness level is increasing in society. Now, this sort of change does not occur on their side of the house when they come up and tell you that it is okay if they have lesser number of posts but more quality of posts. The point at which these posts do not reach the people that they are supposed to, the point at which these posts do not make people question the kind of inherent biases that they already hold, we do not think that they can show any sort of benefit and any sort of metric to regret this entire thing in the first place. Now let me talk about how this acts as a recourse mechanism for a lot of individuals who feel marginalized in their own skin, or who feel left out from society at large. People from the many communities in countries that are marginalized and are minorities, like the LGBTQIA community or minority religions and community, when they're spreading a social or political message, on behalf of their community or on behalf of what their personal belief or personal standpoint is, they are more likely to gain a certain amount of acknowledgement and a certain amount of validation from people who share the same standpoint. The point at which when they go out of social media and they do not gain any sort of like validation or acknowledgement about themselves or reaffirmation about what they stand for is right or wrong, it becomes extremely problematic for them to live in a society where they are not accepted. Why is it extremely problematic for them to live in a society where they are not accepted? Because they cannot come to peace with the kind of identity that they hold, because they cannot come to terms with what they believe in, and they're constantly questioning themselves about their own self-confidence and wondering whether what they stand for is right or wrong. The point at which they do receive some sort of social validation from internet or social media spheres, I think it beats their argument about ethics as at large, because we think that this provides a great recourse mechanism to people who are marginalized and people who are like underprivileged in society to find a sort of outlet and find a sort of recourse to revalidate and reassert their self-confidence and find some sort of yeah. So like the points that we have provided to you are the fact that the spreading a message is far more important than like creating good messages, and the fact that these ethics do not matter as much as like the Prime Minister would like to tell you, simply because of the arguments that we provided to you. Very proud to oppose. Thank you.
I would like to thank that speaker for this speech. Before we move forward, you were asking our excuse me.
Sorry, could I use the washroom quickly? Like 1 minute.
All right, sure.
Thank you.
Whenever you are asking our POI, please be sure to also incorporate the name of the site that you are asking it from. So if you're asking as an OG, say POI OG. So that would make it clear to the speaker who is speaking. All right, so we'll be waiting for. Also, I request speakers to time themselves and to also note that anything spoken after 7:20 perhaps will be unheard by me, right? So I will not be noting it down. I will not be interrupting the speaker, but you should know that it will not factor into any form of marking. All right.
Okay, I'm good.
Without any further ado, I'd like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister here.
Can I be heard?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So initially, I'd like to begin my speech with a few responses to the opening opposition so far. They have tried to redefine virtual signaling in a way that favors their side. However, I think my Prime Minister has already made it very clear what virtual signaling means, and I want to re-stress what my Prime Minister has said and tell them why the opposition is trying to take a different route in the debate that doesn't really make sense. So they did say that our alternative to virtual signaling is virtual signaling itself. However, we don't think so. We think that virtual signaling is like your own opinion and like your own rant on, or like just a way to show support that fits into the trend of everything. And the difference between our alternative, which is sharing a like link on such how to help, or like a video that shows the facts, the difference between this and virtual signaling is that on our side, we're not sharing points of view. We're not sharing opinions, and we're not sharing things in order to get attention to ourselves and in order to get praise or support, and praise from people who say that we're so righteous. We think that on our side, we are less on opinion and making outrageous comments in order to get recognition, but rather to spread the facts in order for everybody to gain their own point of view and for them to actually help the movement. So on our side, the stance is that we regret virtual signaling on social media because it is unethical and it overshadows the real purpose of what social media should be used for when it comes to sharing information about social and political issues. So, okay, first I'm also going to respond to, I'm going to respond to the leader of opposition's point when he's saying that, so his last point was more about like social valuation for marginalized people, where I think this is a bit like far-fetched, because he said that sharing these things to gain themselves recognition and attention and praise from other people will make them feel validated and feel better about themselves. However, there's two flaws with this comment. I think that it's not the correct kind of validation that marginalized people need to gain, because he's already explained how on their side they're going to have a lot of different posts, probably to spread awareness. And this like large amount of posts, most likely your single post about like in the example we provided so far as like the black square isn't going to validate you in the right way. It's just going to be swept up in the sea of posts, and therefore the value of every post decreases. So the second flaw is that that's not exactly exclusive to your side. Our side, we can gain validation as well. And our alternative of spreading links and less opinion-based but more fact-based posts that people can use for them to help the issue that's actually going on themselves will help the marginalized people actually gain more validation, because instead of using using extreme words to make yourself feel good, you can post ways to help your own community that maybe you might feel oppressed and marginalized. And in those posts, you can probably like figure out, and you will understand that people can use those links that you're sharing to actually help you and your community, rather than just seeing the black square and being like, okay, it's there. So following from that, I'm going to explain now the response to virtual signaling on our side, because my Prime Minister has already made it very clear that virtual signaling does not have much like thought put into it. It's a lot of spreading of opinions and not rather than facts. So the impacts are actually very harmful. So firstly, when you read these virtual signaling things like huge rants or like black squares, there's two options of what can happen. So you might just go on with your life like, okay, that's a black square, it's all over my feed, so let's just scroll and there we're done. Maybe you might think about it, but what you actually do, if there's no link there, you're going to be like, okay, especially the people who are indifferent or don't really care. But another thing that can happen if you're actually taking the time to read through the rant of somebody's opinions, and you might get misinformation. And I'm going to explain why misinformation is so harmful and why it's actually very likely in this instance. So first, why is it likely? In this definition of virtual signaling, it's virtual signaling it's sharing things on social media in order to gain attention, because gaining recognition and praise for righteousness is obviously an attention-seeking method on social media. So likely in this situation, to get more attention, a person wanting to do virtual signaling is likely to put dramatized, exaggerated, and comments that might be just from their point of view, but might not be entirely based on facts and might not be actually true from the information standpoint of view. And this is very dangerous because people reading it might actually believe it, especially if they themselves aren't very clearly informed. And looking at the motion, these issues on political and social things, it's very dodgy, the information. Like, you don't really get much from the media, especially for things like shooting of like the cop shooting the George Floyd. At that point, it was very like unclear, and people kept trying, like the footage kept being deleted, and people were very unsure about that time. So spreading information on social media that may be false can create a lot of problems, as this false information will continue to be shared, and this eventually overshadows like the whole purpose of the issue. And the whole issue is kind of like, it's overshadowed and nobody really understands what the issue is anymore. And therefore, and when you have an issue that you don't really understand, especially with mass sharing on social media with this a huge amount of virtual signaling, it's likely that nobody really gets it and the issue can't be solved. Okay, so the next part I'm going to talk about is now why our alternative works and why the post and go on with life situation doesn't work. So when you're doing virtual signaling, you post something on social media, and let's say you post your black square or your rant on like, oh, I think this is blah 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 blah, like a long rant. Maybe it's false, maybe it's not false. This is from the standpoint of like you yourself posting the information. So when you post it, even though I've already explained how it doesn't actually help anyone because it doesn't put any links on ways other people can help when they read your post, and it's one in a sea of many. It doesn't gain attention. I mean, it doesn't like actually do any impact. So when you post, you're actually likely to gain acknowledgement and feel praise for yourself, but really all you've done is just posted a rant or a black square. So you get this false thinking that you've actually helped when you really haven't. You think that all this recognition is giving you like, it's giving your issue, your post, some value, and therefore you think that you've done something to help the issue itself, but you actually really haven't. Therefore, people like this are discouraged to actually go into those links that on our site we'll be posting, and people, instead of posting their black square, they can actually do that and go through those links and help in this realistic way rather than having the false feeling that they have really helped. So therefore, on our side, we think that our alternative of posting links and facts rather than opinions is more ethical and does not overshadow the real issue and will help solve it in the end. Thank you.
I would like to thank that speaker for their speech, inviting the deputy leader of opposition here.
Give me like 20 seconds, okay?
All right.
Since you need some time, I'm gonna go use the washroom for a while.
All right. Please be quick as possible.
1 minute, 1 minute, sorry.
So also, if any of you are feeling like going to washroom, you can just do it right now. So if,
Okay, I'm gonna go.
all right, please be quick.
Okay, I'm back.
We're missing out on some other person as well. If you can get. All right, so I think we're all here. So inviting the deputy leader of opposition here.
Yeah, just okay. So I'll start with a few rebuttals and then I'll go on with my constructive for my case. And so when the opening government comes up and talks about how like people are riding a fame bus, we have to go through what happens when we do that particularly. When people go and post like black squares all over the Instagram with a caption hashtag all like Black Lives Matter, then what happens? The person who has no idea what's happening in the what's currently happening in United States of America goes ahead and like kind of gets curious on what's happening, goes on the internet and researches it. That is the point where these movements gain major support, and that is similar to when we go ahead and do like candlelight marches, when we go ahead and like silent protest, all these candlelight marches that exist, that is also kind of as per the government characterization useless, but people still go ahead and do it because they feel connected to that particular movement. They do whatever they can do. For example, if I'm a normal human being, if I'm like a normal corporate worker who works like 9 to 5 every day, my the sources I have for my the sources I have to relate are like limited when it comes to social media, and we think when people go ahead and do that, it is some beneficial as compared to no benefits at all. Secondly, the major point about misinformation. So how do we go about it? Firstly, they didn't characterize enough of how this misinformation exists. Secondly, how that's inexclusive. That is to say, when we go ahead and like give our views on social media, there's always like comment section open. There's always like people commenting. There's always like people going ahead and telling like this is right, this is wrong, because with facts and with like proper videos, maybe links, pictures. That is to say, people, it's always like censored, it's always cross-check on the social media, whereas on the other hand, where the alternative was linker groups. In the later part of my speech, I'll tell you how that does not work. But firstly, there's less censorship on these groups. Okay, going on with my case. Firstly, when a person goes ahead on social media and seeks validation, that is through virtual signaling, there are two ways to go about it. Okay, firstly, you are likely to garner support. That is to say these people will go ahead and like these people get validation for the social media. Yes, your point is correct, and you go about it. And even like when a person is right or person is wrong, and when it's mixed more of a right or a wrong, when we go about it. Okay, when a person is wrong, they also get validation. But how does this goes about it? Well, like if like in Black Lives Matter protest is going on, if like probably a white supremacist going on like shouting no, Black lives don't matter, all lives matter, at that point of time I'll get more criticism. And why is that criticism very important? That exists only on our side of the house on social media. When I go ahead and get more criticism, i'm more likely to I'm more likely to introspect that why are so many people here disagreeing with me. That is to say, why are so many people bashing me, and why are people giving me facts, why people are coming in the comment section with facts and like what is currently happening in status quo. That is the point. My introspection works and I go about it. And while on the other hand, like if I'm a white supremacist living in a white neighborhood where all my surroundings, all the people like I connect to are of similar kind of views, that is the point of time. That is the point of time we don't get any kind of criticism on our views. We don't get a healthy discussion on our views. That is only present on social media. It's only present when we go ahead and like post our views on social media and seek validation through it. Okay, then we go ahead how my leader came up, like my leader of opposition came and talks about how like people are better off and how movements are better off, and how like the movement starts basically when the minorities in the world generally feel left off, like they feel discriminated, like the LGBT community in like the whole world, the blacks in America, while the Dalits in India, where at the point of time they reach their breaking point. That is to say, they think that enough is enough. That is when they decide to fight back. How do they go about it? How these movements start basically? This is how these movements starts. Like firstly, these people are less in number. That is the minority. Like for example, like they start their movements. When people go ahead and like start their movements, like if 10 people go ahead and shout on like streets of United States of America, there's nothing that much can be attained. So at that particular point of time, linking up with people, that as the alternative that the government provides, linking up with people becomes very important. As we see like the when we go through our history, we go ahead and see like how these movements, how the LGBTQ movements is being successful in various countries because of support of like people outside this community. How the Black Lives movement is gaining so much attention because people from the white communities, people from the colored communities are also supporting them, as well as the LGBTQ community is also coming and support with these all Black Lives Matter movements. Why is this so? Because
Point of information.
I'll tell you later. Okay, when we go ahead and and I'll also like to know how when you go ahead and when we go ahead and like post our views on social media, when we go and like gain attention, that is the point of time these movements are better off. I'll tell you how. Firstly, before that, I'll take your view.
Why on earth is having attention or having the sort of, unity or having the sort of validation only exclusive to your side of the house with virtue signaling? On our side, we still support things like traditional media, CNN, BBC. We still have Facebook posts. Why is it exclusive?
We never said it's exclusive to our house. We say it's better on our house. To allow last minute of my speech, I'll deal with it. Okay, firstly, when like people go in like movements, these media, for example, if 10 people are doing this, media won't get up. When we have more people through social media, it will happen. Why the alternative that the government provides doesn't work? Okay, when we go and like have movements, the alternative the government provides is link ups, and we provide social media. Firstly, we'll talk about how link ups is for the privilege. When we go and like have movements like door to door campaigns, it's for the privilege. I need places, like I need people, I need volunteers to go through it, I need employees, I need to pay them, I need like posters, I need money for the, I need money to print those posters, I need like everything, like I need mics to like go through, like everything is like for the privileged people. Whereas like, and for a person, like for example, if I'm a black person driving a cab in America, I'm probably like in two states of mind. So if I go ahead and join those particular movements, I'm likely to like take leave from my job and likely to lose out on some money. At that point of time, I don't have much options and fun. And then when we go out on social media, we go and like post my opinions. I post my opinions. If people give me validation at that particular point of time, go ahead and like put links for funds, and people will donate from my movements, which is inexclusive to their side of the house. Where fundraising is also a huge burden. That is to say when there's like when people on social, when there's like Facebook posts gaining attention, they're more likely to have more posts, more funds, etc., and that is where we get more attention. That was the answer. That is how I answered that particular POI, okay, and that is how we get more validation, how movements are better off on our side of the house. Very, very proud to propose.
I would like to thank that speaker for their speech. This concludes the opening half of the debate, inviting the government member. Hear, hear.
Sorry, apparently my partner is having some lagging issues. So yeah, we're trying to resolve that.
Your partner is supposed to be the member of government?
Yes, Jen. She will be joining back shortly.
Hi, I think my Wi-Fi died. I don't know what happened, sorry.
You're audible fine right now. You can proceed, that will be fine.
Okay, thank you. Chair, I think opening was full of assertions. So opening government tells you that individuals won't do more, individuals will be confined to empty actions. And opening opposition simply wants to tell you that this will lead to greater awareness, this will lead to greater change, but fails to prove the change mechanisms that will actually result in meaningful activism. What side closing government is going to do is going to uniquely position itself to prove to you a number of things, which you think was lacking in opening. But first into setup, because I think that they failed to tell you what alternatives they wanted to support. Like John said, we would support lobbying, we would support protests, we would support the use of social media in ways that are non-performative. We would support grassroots donations, traditional media, all these sorts of things that existed prior to virtue signaling. We think what is unique about virtue signaling is that it focuses on the merit of an action instead of the actual impact of that action. Because of that, and I'll prove this to you later, we think it's often a useless action that is simply signaling things to others as opposed to the meaningful change that opening opposition wanted to talk about. This is a retrospective debate, we have to note, and I think that the priority in this debate should be about which side is best able to garner change, not about some vague idea of whether this is ethical or not. Into rebuttals. So I'm just going to do a few macro rebuttals, and then John is going to fill in the gaps. I'm going to challenge 3 main things they told us. The first is on this idea of stakeholder, which is that they told us we will be able to change the minds of individuals. I want to challenge who exactly the minds we're changing are. I think it's likely to be already slightly liberal individuals who want to fit in with their liberal friends in their liberal bubble. Therefore, if they tell us that this will result in a great change of opinions, I think that is not likely to happen because these individuals were already going to educate themselves in a world without virtue signaling anyways. But they say then that we will have greater activism. I think that this is unlikely, given that because these individuals want to seek validation, they will not go towards conservative circles and spread their information, but rather towards their friends who share the same opinions as them. We think this is likely to be privileged individuals, unlike they talk about, because these are individuals with access to social media in the first place. The second thing I want to challenge is this idea of content, which is that because it contains links and pictures to petitions, for example, therefore it is useful. I just want to say that firstly, this isn't likely to be the kind of thing that is shared. What we mean by performative activism is things that often do not carry a lot of weight and often things that are very attention grabbing within the public eye, because this is how individuals seek validation. Therefore, we don't think it's likely to be sort of nuanced discussions that they talk about. But secondly, I think that the sharing of this link doesn't mean that someone is actually going to carry out this action. So they never prove to us a mechanism through which individuals will look at that link and therefore be incentivized to click on it. I think oftentimes people just reshare these things without even having to look at it because there exists no accountability mechanisms to see whether they've actually done it or not. People simply do these things because they want validation from their friends. The third thing that they tell us is about awareness, and they say this is extremely important. But I think we can prove to you that in the absence of individuals that are actually fired up about an issue, it is not important. The first thing I want to say is that oftentimes it's not an important enough voting issue. So even if people see that other people, friends and family, have been reposting these things, oftentimes simply because they do not understand the nuances of that information, they're not able to prioritize that as a voting issue. So they won't be able to legislate meaningful change. The second thing we want to say is that protests and things like that are extremely important. And I think oftentimes the reason why people justify virtue signaling is as a gateway to protest. But oftentimes because you lack the sort of monetary assistance, and I think that that you don't get access to those same types of resources because of the fact that this content is often very trivial, that means that the protests ultimately, for example, are not able to lobby effectively, are not able to have meaningful discussions with politicians in which you can legislate greater change. Into my 2 extensions. Firstly, about why this is reductionist to methods of activism and cripples the movement as a whole. And secondly, why this fuels conservative narratives and discredits the movement. The first thing that we want to say is that often that opening in government didn't really prove why these are actually empty acts of public commitment. They simply asserted it, and we're going to prove to you why. The first reason is because of your intention. So if you don't intend to educate yourself, we don't think that you're likely to do so, at the point at which, secondly, there are no mechanisms of accountability. So you can share a link for a donation, but that doesn't mean that you will necessarily donate. Or even if you do, I think oftentimes this means that you're donating towards the most attention-grabbing organization, for example, and you leave others behind. We think ultimately this is also because humans are innately trying to seek out the easiest pathway to absorb their moral burdens. And if the dominant narrative surrounding this is that you should simply post things as opposed to contributing towards meaningful change, individuals are likely to opt for the easy way out, not the education that they want to talk about. If the magnitude of the movement is trivialized, individuals are likely to follow that same mindset. What are the impacts of this? I think firstly, this is counterproductive to meaningful activism that would otherwise have existed, because we told you that these individuals are already going to be liberal if they opt into these social movements in the first place. If the dominant narrative was one of protests, if it was of donations, I think in a climate of educating yourself, I think those individuals to seek validation because they're subject to societal pressures, because they're innately social creatures, would opt to do those things anyways. If we appeal to their innate morality, which is the counterfactual that we think we should have, they would do these sorts of things. But secondly, it crowds out more important information. So they cannot say that we can have our cake and eat it too, right? For a few reasons. Firstly, because the short attention spans of individuals, this is likely to be quick, visceral snapshots, not the lengthy information they want to tell you about. Secondly, because of the fact that this is going to be of higher quality, because the barrier of entry is much lower, algorithms are likely to be tuned towards these things with higher quality. So they tend to publish posts about Blackout Tuesday and prioritize that in your feeds as opposed to meaningful information. Thirdly, because it's universally acceptable versus specific information that is actually informative, that's actually controversial, that actually talks about the contentious issues rather than the fact that, for example, a Black man got murdered, which we all understand is a bad thing, right? Because of this, we think it cripples change that already happened within the movement, and we think that it's highly harmful. But secondly, we think it also fuels conservative narratives. This is extremely important because oftentimes these platforms such as Breitbart, such as Fox News, have really large platforms, right? We think that oftentimes moderates and conservatives are the key to meaningful change because they exist in swing states, for example, that could vote in your next president, or the fact that we need both the Senate and the House to pass meaningful legislation. What does status quo look like then? We think that under status quo, conservatives say that these movements are trying to be woke, that they have performative activism, that they're social justice warriors and youth who do not know anything, but only seek to stoke their ego. I think this is uniquely harmful at the point at which you have platforms like Breitbart, who have huge audiences with meme accounts that are saying that these individuals are snowflakes, right? But I think they're able to prey upon narratives that firstly say that, look, they have such a short attention span, they don't even know what they want. And secondly, that they're extremely self-centered. I think the media is a culturally normative force, meaning that if conservatives are able to trivialize their movement, their viewers are able to do this as well. I think ultimately, if you want your movement to be taken seriously, as one is actually fighting for change rather than a sort of performative activism, if you want there to be meaningful information that actually educates people and that dominates the media rather than virtue signaling, you would go with side of closing government.
I would like to thank that speaker for their speech, inviting the member of opposition. Here. Yes, you are.
Okay, so in this age of modern technology, social media is used for a number of reasons and to mostly spread information. An example of this is virtue signaling. Before I get into my main arguments, I would like to have some rebuttals to these things. So for opening government, they have mentioned that the Black Square incident, that they aren't really helping with anything just because they're posting a black square. However, even if it isn't helping anyone, which in most cases it is, as my site said, they post links, etc., which they said they don't, even though most people who are trying to help do, they're still expressing and sharing their opinions. And if you're regretting it and not letting them share their opinion just because it's not helping the cause or opinion they are they're sharing their opinions on, you're denying their basic right to freedom of speech. Secondly, even if the black square one, I'm going to go again, the black square example, it doesn't help at all is assumption. Even if it isn't telling any donating site, it's still spreading the opinion, sharing information with others. For once, I didn't know about the Black Lives Matter until I'd gone on social media and seen a rant or a post or whatever you want to call it. Just because you want giving to donating site or anything to do with money doesn't mean it isn't helping the cause. Now I would like to go on and talk about the problem. It was assumed by the opening government that in the problem that virtue signaling is unethical, and just because people have the intention of getting fame, which most people don't, it is unethical. And yeah, that I feel like it isn't. Okay, let me rephrase it. The problem which I at least understood, is that it's unethical. It shouldn't exist just because people have an intention of getting fame, etc. However, it isn't as ethical as you're trying to help and show oppression or your political stance, which is a basic freedom. And I want to try to say what the real problem is in this. The problem which I'm proposing is that the freedom of speech of certain individual is oppressed. For example, the blacks, and they are using virtual signaling to actually try to tell their point of view. So why is this important? First of all, right to free speech, as I've mentioned before. If you're regretting someone's opinions and saying it's unethical just because of the reason that they have an intention or they're going to get fame, etc., you're not treating them like humans and sort of like animals and are really going with their rights. And thirdly, in the oppression, it actually helps the people show their point of view and for more people to learn about this oppression which is happening. For the George Floyd case, I want to ask everyone, let's just assume that the media didn't do it and no one on social media was sharing about it. How many of us would actually know about this? So I'm just to think. First, I want to start with my principal argument. It's immoral to not let anyone share their views just because they aren't fully informed or have an incentive. even if they are, even if the person who is writing about, let's say, the Black Lives Movement isn't fully informed about it, they don't know what was the reason the cops were trying to arrest them, it doesn't necessarily mean that the person who is trying to write about it, the opinion sharer, the opinion will change just because they aren't writing, just because they aren't fully informed about it. If you're assuming directly that just because they aren't fully informed about it, they're going to be spreading lies, that is a bad assumption, as most likely they aren't going to write about things they don't know about and are just going to share a small opinion, like, oh, even though I don't know fully about the whole incident, I think the cops, what they did was unethical and stuff like that. They aren't spreading any lies in it, they aren't telling anything wrong in it, and aren't exaggerating at all. They're just plainly saying their opinion. Secondly, if you're not letting them, or even regretting that they're not fully informed or trying to get fame or anything, they still have a right to free speech. They should be, under any circumstances, allowed to try to say anything they want, even if it's exaggerated a bit. It isn't really spreading any false information, as they're just trying to tell their opinion, and are not like the cops that shot George Floyd and beat him 10 million times, and they aren't doing stuff like that. They're just trying to tell their opinions. So now I want to say one last rebuttal about wrong one. Now I want to go on the standards. In the three standards, I'm going to be comparing in which world are people's views more valued, in which world are people valued, and in which world are people... sorry, I'll take it later. And in which world are people used to accepting others' opinions? So in standard one, in which world are people's views valued? Valued more in our world, as if regretting their views just because they have incentive on, they aren't fully assured, you aren't treating them like humans. You're just assuming that they're going to get it wrong without even trying. And by regretting them, you're taking away their free speech, etc., as you aren't happy about them sharing their opinions, which is first not treating them like human and taking away their free speech. And in the second one, in which world are people more used to accepting their own opinions? Everyone has a right to be heard in society freely, and no one will be able to share their opinions and will continue in their...
Before 6.
What? Pardon? Okay. So in which, and will continue to be oppressed. In the George Floyd case, as I mentioned before, if no one knew about it, what would happen? The blacks would continue to oppress. The cops who did that to Floyd would probably be out doing stuff like this to others. And it is unjustified to directly assume that just because they aren't fully informed, it means that they're going to be spreading lies. Now, I would like to go back to my problem. As I mentioned before, the Gov had many assumptions, such as it's unethical to just assume that it's unethical, that they're misinformed today or have an intention of getting fame. It means that they're unethical. And I don't believe that's true. So for all these reasons, I would like to end my speech. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank that speaker for their speech. In order to conclude the debate from side government, inviting the government whip. Hear.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, side of opposition was largely uncontentious in today's debate for this reason. They largely wanted to treat attention as an ends rather than a means to their goals. What that meant is that both opening opposition and closing opposition, for the vast majority of the analysis, were telling us that This virtue signaling necessarily leads to the proliferation of social media posts, which leads to people understanding the issue and therefore having understanding of what the nuances are. What we told you from the very beginning is A, that you would not understand these issues because by virtue of these virtue signaling being one of which the intention is not to educate, but just to be righteous, I don't think you will get the sort of information that is valuable. But more importantly, right, they do not tell us why exactly this attention is uniquely going to be one that is good. Why this attention is one that leads to change, and what are the sort of mechanisms that are able to translate to things like police reform? What are the sorts of things that will actually translate to legislation and things like fixing of the courts? They never once wanted to explain why the attention was uniquely good and therefore was going to be one that was good for society. By that very nature, this macro rebuttal in and of itself goes to show that they never proved the impacts of what their arguments actually was. We told you from the beginning that their attention was not one that we wanted under our side of the house because you detract from the movement, that it was counterproductive in nature, but that you also water down individual contribution to social movements. But before I proceed to my issues, a few other things to note. So firstly, deal with closing opposition. I think they are already out of this debate for a very simple reason. This debate was never about freedom of speech, as their main argument was. It was never about whether individuals should be able to. It's what we as society think is the right thing to do and what is uniquely good for society. We told you, importantly, that social movements, their strength, and the sort of change they're able to make is the most important contention in this debate. It was never about what was ethical. It's never about your right to freedom of speech, because uniquely what's at play here is about helping the lives of millions of individuals on the ground, black individuals who suffer from police discrimination on the ground, and what sorts of policies we can achieve that. So it was never about a policy debate banning people from the ability to speak whatsoever. All right, now let me deal with opening opposition, right? So they wanted to say, look, many of these individuals have a good intention. They want to educate themselves whatsoever. Mr. Speaker, I think let's just read the info slide. I quote verbatim, in order to garner praise or acknowledgement of one's righteousness. Okay, so I think for the vast majority of things like we saw with Blackout Tuesday, for the vast majority of instances and by virtue of the info slide, they have to bite the bullet and say for that a lot of these individuals, it is not in their best interest to be knowledgeable whatsoever. Then they said, well, our main argument is that we help marginalized communities, the LGBTQ, because now we validate them by our use of social media. When I peel why was this so uniquely specific? They say, oh, well, it's not exclusive. To which I say, if it's not exclusive, what is the sort of benefit that they're getting under their side of the house? If we can also get the sort of validation, if we can also get the sort of attention through traditional media, what is their benefit? At the very best case scenario, they get very marginal benefits under their side of the house. Now, two issues in today's speech to prove why CEO edges out against all. The first, on virtue signaling on the strength of your movement, and secondly, on virtue signaling and how it influences individual action. Firstly, on virtue signaling on the strength of your movement. We firstly told you, and why EJ's extension was so important, is because we told you that it cripples social movements and eviscerates current progress. So let's look for a second. The characterization that we provided you on these movements and these virtue signaling is that because the intention is not one to be knowledgeable or deal with the nuances, your narrative is often going to be very vague and very unnuanced. We saw that with things of like the sort of cartoon pictures being posted after Breonna Taylor's death. We saw that with Blackout Tuesday, in which people do not understand the message but randomly share it. It leads to an unnuanced and vague narrative. But why this is uniquely important is because it necessarily crowds out other means. It crowds out other, means of things like protests. It crowds out things like the sorts of nuanced discussions that you want to have in order to be able to lobby. Because understand that the virality of the media and the way by which these things are spread in the millions are oftentimes going to be the only thing that we talk about. Why is this uniquely harmful? Firstly, we told you how you empower conservative blowback, right? Because we told you trivialize the moment at which your movement seems like a few pubescent teens who all they know how to show is like post black squares. I literally saw a meme that day that says, you want to know how to solve racism? Black square, racism solved. That's the sort of narrative you get under your side of the house. Prager University, a conservative media page, literally went around with a microphone to ask teens about what they thought of the movement. Because they were so unknowledgeable of it, they ruined the image of this movement, and the literal entire comment section was a laughing stock. Right? Daily Wire literally runs a meme account about these sorts of things, and because of the culture normative and virality of the media, we think it's uniquely harmful. What this uniquely means is that for people in the middle ground, people whose minds we want to change, and people who we want to get to our side to support the movement, turn away from it because it's trivialized and it seems like an unclear movement without a direction that does not know what
So
to do.
POI from opening.
Right? But
Last chance.
the second thing to this is we think, fine, their very best case scenario, they get more people on their side of the house. Sure, we buy that. But we think it's even better if we have a strong and concentrated movement. We think even if we have less people, our ability to know what we're talking about, the ability to send representatives to lobby, to talk with congressmen is better enabled under our side of the house. Under their side of the house, lobbying relies on a concentrated and directioned sort of movement. They lose that. And that's the point at which things become controversial. You enhance things like polarization because individuals are literally just posting memes online, right? But more importantly, what did we tell you, right? You water down individual contribution to social movements. I just noticed there was zero response to this. Ishan told you that it is part of human psyche to try and absolve my moral burden in the easiest way possible. So even if I know I see a dying man on the street and I know a CPR is needed, just calling the ambulance to me seems like an okay thing to do, right? This happens at a point at which you can now use social media as a way to shirk yourself of responsibilities, and it's the only way by which posting a black square means I do not have to donate. That's the sort of thing that's empowered, because morality and the sort of ethical decisions we make are often shaped by the media and shaped by what is present in the status quo. That happens at the outside of the mouse. Right? That's why we see a sharp drop in things like donation towards women and feminism shelters under the 21st century. That's why we see the lack of protest in a lot of instances, because individuals do not have to do these things because they now think that posting a black square is enough. For all these reasons, let's just look at the nuances of what it means to protest, what it means to be able to empower a social movement. For all those reasons, Opp gets none of that. We're very proud to propose.
I would like to thank that speaker for their speech. In order to conclude the debate,